On the 15th of May 1536, Queen Anne Boleyn stood before a crowd of 2,000 spectators at the Tower of London on trial for her life. Accused of adultery with 5 men, including her own brother, and plotting the death of the king, the charges could hardly have been more grave. Despite the overwhelming injustice of what she was enduring, Anne Boleyn acted with poise and incredible strength, watching as a group of men, including her former love interest, Harry Percy, and her uncle, Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, decided her fate. To discuss what happened on this remarkable day in history, I am pleased to welcome historian, author, and all-round Anne Boleyn expert, Claire Ridgway, onto the show. Claire has spent the last 15 years researching and writing about Anne's story. She joins me today to unpick what must surely be the most explosive court case ever held at the Tower of London, a case which would end with the Queen of England suffering the ultimate punishment. Welcome back to the Tudor Chess Podcast, episode 39, The Trial of Queen Anne Boleyn with Claire Ridgway. Welcome to the Tudor Chess Podcast, Claire Ridgway. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good stuff. So, a lot of people will know who you are, but just in case, could you provide me with a bit of an intro into your background, so where you grew up and what you now do full-time?
Well, I grew up in Warwickshire in the UK, so a stone's throw from Stratford. So, yeah, right, Shakespeare's country. So I grew up there and, stayed in England till, 2006, I think it was. Yep. And then we moved, our whole family, we moved to Spain, me, Tim, and our little children at the time, and settled here. But yeah, I've been doing Tudor history full time since 2009. That's when I actually started working in Tudor history. And that was caused by, it goes well with today's talk, really, because I had a dream about Anne Boleyn's execution, and I think that was caused by me watching the Tudors, and I was reading various historical fiction at the time, and I was a spectator at her execution, and I knew that this queen was innocent, but there was absolutely nothing I could do about it. And I remember the swordsman swinging the sword and just me just yelling, but no sound coming out of my mouth. And that's where the dream kind of stopped. And I woke up and I woke my husband up and told him that I needed to research Anne Boleyn's life and that he needed to set me up a blog, because he was really techie. He needed to set me up a blog called the Anne Boleyn Files. I even knew the name. And that was it. That's how my Tudor history work started.
Wow. So had you always been interested in Tudor history?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then that was the thing that kind of kick-started the desire to actually do it as a job.
Yes, because I didn't actually do a history degree. I mean, I'm not an academic historian. I did history A-level, and during that I did the Tudors and Stuarts in the English history bit, and I did the Reformation in the European history bit, and I loved both of those. So I've always loved history, and I did religion at university, so I did the history of Christianity, which obviously had loads of the Reformation in that as well. So I've always loved history, but it wasn't really until 2009. I'd been doing freelance writing up until that point, but I'd been a teacher before that. And I just decided that I wanted to write about things that I wanted to write about rather than just writing stuff for clients.
Mm.
So really the Anne Boleyn research was just on the side, just a hobby. And then it kind of took over my life.
Yeah, very, very similar to me, I suppose, in a way. Again, like you, not, I don't have a degree in history. I have a degree, but it's in media. It's just always been a passion that has now, same as you, turned into a full-time job. So we know what sparked your passion for Tudor history and in particular Anne Boleyn's story. If you could pick a single moment from history to go back and witness, you can jump in a time travel machine. What would it be? I assume it wouldn't be the execution.
It wouldn't be Anne's execution, no. It would probably be her coronation.
Same as me.
Actually, her coronation procession. If I was there for a few days, I'd like the whole thing, but her coronation procession, that would be fab.
Same as me. That's exactly what I would choose as well.
Yeah, just to see her, that moment of triumph, that victory.
Yeah, and I would love the opportunity during the coronation to look around and recognise people based on portraits and stuff. I just think because most people would have been there. So I think that would be a fascinating thing to be able to see, for sure.
And to know that she was pregnant with Elizabeth I as well,
Yeah, absolutely. So we're actually here today given the significance of the time of year, we're here to talk about Anne Boleyn's trial, which took place on the 15th of May, 1536, the day that we're actually recording this podcast, but it will be going out later this week. So it's a very apposite time to have a discussion. So firstly, where did Anne Boleyn's trial actually take place?
It took place in the King's Hall, the Great Hall of the Tower of London, which was the royal complex of the Tower of London, which actually isn't, you can't see it today, but it would have been a typical Great Hall. So it was a different place to where the four of the men were tried. They were tried at Westminster Hall. But yeah, Anne and George's trials happened in the King's Hall, the Tower of London.
Yeah, it's such a shame, isn't it, that part of the tower is gone. It would be so wonderful to be able to be in that space. I've read that as many as 2,000 people attended the trial. Now, do we have any sense on sort of the makeup of that audience? Were a large number of them just members of the public who were able to get in, or was it mostly the nobility? Do we have any sense on any of that?
I haven't found any sources that really state, who was present. I've just found sources saying that they had sort of specially built sort of seating to house that many people, so that people could view the proceedings. But I would have assumed, because this is the Tower, this isn't somewhere that really was, a public kind of place. I know the Tower wasn't like it is today. There was lots going on at the Tower with the Mint and everything like that. But you could have done like security, you could have controlled sort of people that could get into the Tower complex. So I would think that the royal court, members of the royal court, those not involved in sitting on the jury, and then ambassadors and their staff, and that would have been there. So I know Lancelot de Carle, for example, who was secretary to the French ambassador, his poem about Anne Boleyn's life and fall, he's writing as if he was an eyewitness at the trial. So people like him. But I can't imagine your general average Tudor Londoner being able to get in there. I'm sure there was security.
Yeah, they wouldn't have just wandered in.
No.
Anne Boleyn's uncle, Thomas Howard, the 3rd Duke of Norfolk, he presided over the trial as Earl Marshal of England. Did he show any distress at having to fulfil this role, not only to his niece, but also his nephew, George?
Well, we haven't got any hint of how he felt going into the trial. He was appointed just a few days before, he was appointed Lord High Steward of England, specifically to preside over this trial. And it must have been quite strange for him, weird for him, thinking he was going to be trying his niece and nephew. But then that was his job. That was sort of in the office of, Earl Marshal. So we don't know how he felt going into it, but he is recorded as having tears running down his face when he actually gave the guilty verdict and sentenced Anne to death. He was weeping, apparently, at that point. But then he had fallen out with Anne. He had distanced himself from Anne. Him and Anne had quite a falling out. But still, your niece, how's that?
Hadn't he tutted as well because when he was there when she was physically arrested, and I believe him.
Yes.
He tutted at her.
Yeah, she wasn't impressed with his behaviour at Greenwich when she was called before the members of council. So, yeah.
Could you skeptically surmise maybe he was crying more for the fact that his blood was that everything he'd worked for was now sort of breaking apart in front of him? Could it be he was crying for himself rather than his niece?
Perhaps so, but I don't know. I mean, I don't think he ever felt that he was in kind of any danger or that his reputation had been blemished at all, because he wouldn't have been there presiding over it. I don't think if there was any, worries about that. So, I don't know. I think just perhaps emotion got the better of him at that moment. I don't go with the whole idea that they were crocodile tears, because I'm not sure that he would have wanted to really have been seen showing emotion. I think they were probably real.
Yeah, I would agree, but I know that that's been muted before, that it was more tears for himself than Anne, but I would agree with you.
Yeah, it could be.
So what were the actual charges laid against Anne Boleyn?
Okay, well, I've done quite a lot of work on looking at I've got pieces of paper here, because I looked at the indictments that were drawn up by the two grand juries, the grand juries of Kent and Middlesex, and sort of put them together, the charges from those. I mean, she was charged with procuring the men to be her lovers, seducing them, sleeping with them, plotting with them to kill the king. Because obviously just her committing adultery wasn't enough for high treason. It was really the death and destruction of the king. And she was also accused of committing incest with her brother and plotting with him. So you've got things like, in the indictments, it says entertaining malice against the king and following her lustful desires, procuring her husband's servants to be her adulterers and concubines by base conversations and kisses, touchings, gifts, and other infamous incitations, so that some of them yielded to her vile provocations. I mean, obviously it's like quite salacious language. Seducing and committing adultery with Sir Henry Norris, Sir Francis Weston, William Brereton, and Mark Smeaton, seducing her own brother, George Boleyn, Lord Rochford. I mean, this is when it gets really quite nasty, sort of salacious language, to violate her, alluring him with her tongue in the said George's mouth and the said George's tongue in hers, and also with kisses, presents, and jewels, so that he violated and carnally knew her. She was accused of entertaining them with gifts, conspiring the death and destruction of the king with them all, agreeing to marry one of them after the king's death, and that one was said to be Sir Henry Norris. She was accused of never having loved the king, causing harm and peril to him through her malice and adultery, and committing treasons in contempt of the crown and of the issue and heirs of the said king and queen by her actions. So that's compilated, sort of compiled from the
it's almost,
indictments.
In some respects, it's almost deliberately pornographic in a way. The accusations are so vulgar that it almost adds, I suppose, it added more weight to the presumed guilt in a way that they almost over-egged the accusations to such a degree that it almost made it all the more believable, because they were so unbelievable, if that makes sense.
And you can imagine the reaction in court, everyone going, what? Wow. Yeah, that kind of shocked reaction.
So there's no accusation of witchcraft.
No.
I know that's spurious. Where does that come from?
Well, I think it stems from, some of it I think stems from good old Nicholas Sander and his work, The Rise of the Anglican Schism, when, he's really describing Anne as being quite witch-like, really. She's got protruding tooth, she's got a goiter, she's got,
When? Yeah.
yeah. I think his physical description of her. But then also Henry VIII is recorded as saying in spring 1536 that he'd been forced into this second marriage by sortilege and charms. Now, he never says witchcraft. And this is, in my opinion, it's bluster from Henry VIII. And if he seriously thought that Anne was really a witch and that she'd really used some kind of potion or witchcraft on him, then that would have been used to blacken her name. I know witchcraft at the time, it hadn't yet been made a sort of a capital crime. I think is that 1542. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it would have been enough to blacken her name as well as the incest charge. If she was a witch as well. So I think if he truly thought that would have been used against her, definitely.
How far in advance of the trial was Anne actually made aware of the allegations against her?
Well, I don't think she was ever made aware of all of the allegations against her. I mean, when she was called before members of the King's Council that day, 2nd of May in Greenwich, she was informed that she was accused of committing adultery with 3 men, Mark Smeaton, Sir Henry Norris, and one other unnamed at that time. And that's why you've got Anne getting to the Tower, being imprisoned there and just rambling and saying things in front of these ladies, little knowing that they were all spies that were kind of, recording everything she said. And she's trying to figure out what she said, what she's done, who to, what on earth, how is this happening? And that's when she mentions Sir Francis Weston and the conversation that she sort of had with him, sort of teasing him, well, reprimanding him in a way, telling him that he shouldn't be interested in Mad Shelton like Sir Henry Norris is. Sir Henry Norris is courting her. That, Weston's married. He should be thinking about his wife. And, he says, there's someone I love more than both of them. And she says, who? And he says, you. It's all courtly love kind of things. And she repeats that in the Tower. She repeats that conversation. And of course, like 2 days later, who ends up in the Tower but Sir Francis Weston? So I don't think she's aware of, she's told that her brother is in the Tower, but I don't think she's told before the trial that she's accused of incest. Right. And I don't think she's aware that, Brereton, that anything about him. I don't think she's really kept, up to date. And that was the norm. People weren't really told what the whole of what they were being charged with until they actually got there to their trial. So
yeah, in a way, it sounds like actually sort of ironically Anne did more damage for her cause in the Tower by the fact that she didn't actually know the full details, by speaking things that were relatively inconsequential, actually fanned the flames even further.
Yeah, I don't think she did herself damage because I don't think there was anything that she could have done. She was going to die, but I think she damaged other people. Not, of course, she could not have known that.
Yeah, of course,
but, Weston obviously got hauled in because of her words.
Famously, Anne was accompanied by 4 women in the Tower of London, and we know that Anne was unhappy about the selection of these women. I know she said that she thought it ill of the king that he put women about her that she had never loved. Do we know if these were the same women who accompanied her to the trial?
We know from accounts of her trial that she was accompanied by her aunt, Lady Elizabeth Boleyn, who was married to Sir James Boleyn, Thomas Boleyn's brother, and Lady Kingston as well, who was the wife of Sir William Kingston, the Constable of the Tower of London. And that's the Lady Kingston that was in charge of recording everything that Anne said to pass on to her husband, who then wrote his daily dispatches to Cromwell. So those two are the two that are named as attending on her at her trial.
We've got quite a lot of records about what Anne Boleyn wore at her execution. Is there any indication of what she wore to her trial?
Well, the only one I found is in George Younghusband's book, The Tower from Within, and he's said to have used sort of Tower records in writing his book. But he doesn't actually, I don't think he names his source for this. He has her wearing a black velvet gown, a scarlet damask petticoat, and a cap decorated with a black and white feather. But I don't know his source. So everybody else comments on Anne's behaviour, her countenance and that, rather than what she wore. So I don't know about that. But she wore, from accounts of her execution, she's wearing a scarlet damask, kirtle. So perhaps so. It's hard to know. She certainly looked dignified and, queenly.
Yeah, interesting observation that he mentions a cap with a feather rather than a gable hood or a French hood.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Catherine Parr's portrait.
Yeah, that's just what I was about to say, is that sort of that. Yeah, and the one that Claire Foy wore in Wolf Hall in one scene as well, something quite similar. Can you take us through the sort of first stages of the trial? It's depicted in film and television that Cromwell was directly involved in asking the questions to the Queen. Was that the case?
No, I think Cromwell was the brains behind it all. And he's not mentioned in the accounts as, doing any of the questioning or anything. And we haven't got a blow by blow sort of account of the trial as such. But we know it was Attorney General Sir Christopher Hales who was the one that was in charge of putting forward the case against Anne, accusing her of incest, adultery, plotting to kill the king, and promising to marry Sir Henry Norris after the king's death, and also of making fun of the king and his dress. She was accused of that in court as well. So Cromwell is the one in the background. He's the one that put the whole investigation together, or I'd call it a plot. So that's so Christopher Hales does that, and then Anne denies all of the charges, admits only to giving Sir Francis Weston money, as she had done with many young gentlemen at court. She states nothing that's not out of the ordinary. She pleads not guilty and defends herself soberly. So that's what we have happening.
How did Tudor trials differ to how they do now? Am I right in thinking that the onus was very much that you were guilty until proven innocent, rather than the other way round as it is today?
Yes, in definitely in cases of high treason. High treason really is a plot to kill the monarch. It's against the monarch, the sovereign, God's anointed sovereign. So a jury in cases like that, they're meant to do their duty and find the defendant guilty, and the defendant is presumed guilty, not innocent, unless they manage to prove themselves innocent. And if you're unaware of the full charges against you, and you don't have legal representation either, you're by yourself, so you're going into court knowing nothing, so you haven't got a lot of chance anyway. But from my own research, I think the only person to be acquitted of high treason in Henry VIII's reign was William Dacre, 3rd Baron Dacre, and it took him 7 hours to defend himself to get acquitted. And he did actually manage to get acquitted. And then you've got an example of Mary I's reign, Sir Nicholas Throckmorton, who gets acquitted. He's accused of treason. He's implicated in Wyatt's rebellion. But he puts up a spirited defence, gets acquitted, but Mary I isn't happy. So she gets the jurors arrested and thrown into jail. and they're imprisoned for a while, then they're fined. And Throckmorton remains in prison until 1555. He isn't actually executed. So yeah, they had to go back into court and find him guilty. So you you weren't going to get off a charge of high treason, really. Everything was against you.
Weren't they actually? I believe that George Boleyn put up a very sturdy defence, and there were actually quite a lot of comments that people thought he might just get off.
Yeah, Chapuis really thought he'd get off. Yeah, he said that people were, laying bets really that he would be acquitted. But how can you be when, your sister is already, I think Anne's was first, wasn't it? Her
Yes.
trial was first. How can you be if she's been found guilty of committing incest with you and plotting with you to kill the king? Then how can you be innocent? So, yes.
So, who made up the jury that were trying Anne and George? Were they all men that the siblings would have known well?
Well, I have got a full list I can read you, but it's quite long, so perhaps I'll just pick out a few. But they were all people that Anne and George knew. I mean, they were tried, unlike the other men who were tried by a commission of Oyer and Terminer. Anne and George were tried because of their status, because George was the nobility, Anne was queen. They were tried by a jury of their peers. So they would have known all of them. Anne would have known them. They were all men close to the king, but men sort of high in favour. So they included, I'm not going to give you the whole list because we'd be here quite a long time, but they included men like Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk, Anne's former sweetheart, Henry Percy, or Earl of Northumberland, who actually collapsed after the guilty verdict had been given.
That tells you so much, doesn't it?
You've got the Earl of Worcester, whose wife Elizabeth was friends with Anne. Jane Boleyn's father, Lord Morley, was on the jury. The Earl of Oxford, who bore Anne's crown at her coronation, he was there. The Earl of Sussex, who was a close friend to the king, and so therefore Anne knew him. Lord Chamberlain William Lord Sanders, who Anne would have known. So these are all men that Anne would have known. But they were all men that were high in favour with the king, close to the king. So they all knew their duty.
Yeah, and quite a few that were hostile towards Anne, because wasn't the Marquis of Exeter and Henry Pole, I think, were both.
Yes, Henry Courtenay. Yes, he was. Yeah, they were all people that were either like supporters of the Lady Mary or Anne enemies, or that were close to the king or owed the king kind of something. So
Mercifully, Thomas Boleyn, Earl of Wiltshire, Anne and George's father, was not on the jury, but did he have a role to play at the trial?
he wasn't on the jury at Anne's trial, but he was on the commission of Oyer and Terminer that tried Norris, Weston, Brereton and Smeaton. So that commission had already found those men were guilty of, sleeping with his daughter and plotting with her to kill the king. So therefore he'd made her guilty, hadn't he? If he'd called them guilty. So he definitely played a part. And he had no choice in that. I know some people damn him for that, but he was appointed to the commission. You didn't exactly wriggle out of that. And I think he was a broken man after that. I mean, he disappears for a while. I think he goes off to Hever and just grieves with Elizabeth. But then he has to, for his family's sake, he has to come back. He has to, his job, a courtier's job is to serve the king. That's his job. He knows nothing else. He doesn't have another choice. He has to prove his loyalty. He has to work for the king. And so he comes back to court and he's involved in the Pilgrimage of Grace, putting the Pilgrimage of Grace down and all sorts, and is very loyal to the king. But that must have been so hard. And I don't think the trial, everything that happened in spring 1536 had an effect on his health. Him and Elizabeth, they die 1538 and 1539, don't they? And I don't think that's a big surprise. because I think they went through so much. Losing two of your children like that.
Yeah, it must have been, yeah. I mean, it doesn't even bear thinking about what they went through. It must have been just horrific beyond belief. How did Anne Boleyn herself respond to the questions posed to her? Did she put up a sturdy defence? You know, given that she didn't actually have a lot of information going into the trial, was she able to put across sturdy responses to the questions put forward?
Yes, I mean, all of the records state that during the whole trial that she was incredibly dignified, polite, and that she defended herself admirably. Both her and George were very eloquent and defended themselves admirably. So, yeah, I mean, you've got Charles Risley recording that after the indictments were read out, she made so wise and discreet answers to all things laid against her, excusing herself with her words so clearly as though she'd never been faulty to the same. And Charles Risley here, he's a chronicler, but he's also Windsor Herald. So, you know, he's not an Anne Boleyn supporter. He's a royal servant. So he's not a biased person here. He's recording what he saw. So I think, yes, incredible performance, I think, for what she was going through.
I also recall reading somewhere that the women that were watching the trial, who had previously been quite hostile towards Anne Boleyn, actually softened towards her in the trial. Is that correct, or is that spurious?
Well, this comes from Lancelot de Carl, the secretary to the French ambassador, who seems to have been in the courtroom in the King's Hall. In his poem, he mentions that those who held a great hatred towards Anne had pity for her after the trial.
Right.
So Anne's behaviour obviously, you know, had an impact, and all of the accounts that we have praise her behaviour. I mean, even Eustace Chapuis, you know, who calls her the concubine, and that quite on a regular basis, and really isn't an Anne fan or a Boleyn fan, a real Catherine of Aragon and Mary supporter. You know, he's skeptical of the whole investigation, and skeptical of the charges, and very skeptical of the whole procedure, the legal proceedings. So I think all of that kind of shows that people's attitudes may well have shifted from what they saw of, you know, Anne and George.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly telling that someone like Chapuis was cognizant of the fact that this was the accusations were so hollow, that I think that really is very telling, actually, about the wider belief really among the nobility, and that they were just as expected, going along with the status quo to ensure that they didn't upset the king. We've all seen Anne of a Thousand Days. We would love for Anne to have been given the chance to speak and cross-examine anyone. Did that? I'm assuming that just didn't happen at all.
No, I mean, she was able to speak to, you know, she pleaded not guilty. And as I said, Charles Risley records, you know, her making answers to the accusations. So she was allowed to speak. But there were no witnesses for her to cross-examine. You know, this is the whole thing. There was just nothing.
Yeah, that's what I was about to ask, is were there any witnesses brought forward at all?
No. From the accounts, we know that, you know, Chapuis states that there were no witnesses at all. No one to stand there for you to examine or cross-examine.
Jane Boleyn is consistently put forward as being a witness against Anne Boleyn, as sort of playing quite a large role in the destruction of Anne and her own husband, George Boleyn. But I've always felt that I've never understood the basis for this, because there isn't actually any evidence to support it. Is that correct?
Poor Jane Boleyn. I mean, perhaps this is where I have a controversial theory, because I think even Eric Ives doesn't like, Jane Boleyn in his biography of Anne. Yeah, I mean, she's history's scapegoat, isn't she, Jane? Because there were just absolutely no witnesses recorded. I mean, there's this account of Jane at her execution in 1542. confessing to her part in bringing the Boleyns down. But that is, the work of Julia Fox, whose biography I'd highly recommend. She's found that to be a complete forgery, and we know from Otwell Johnson, he wrote a letter to his brother. He was an eyewitness at Jane and Catherine Howard's executions, and he talks about what they said, and Jane didn't say that at all. The only thing that Jane seems to have done in 1536 is to have given the information about Anne Boleyn confiding in her about the king's sexual problems, and then Jane talking to George about it, because we know that comes out at George's trial. So Jane must have been questioned with Anne's ladies, and that's the only information that she seems to have given. She's not accused by anyone. I mean, Justice John Spellman, he's a judge. He wrote quite detailed legal reports on known cases. And his report on Anne's trial, he says all the evidence was of bawdry and lechery, so there was no such whore in the realm. And he noted that the matter was disclosed posthumously by Lady Wingfield, a former lady of the Queen's bedchamber. Now, his report is damaged and incomplete, but it appears that something that Lady Wingfield, who was a good friend of Anne Boleyn, something that was said or written between them served as evidence. We don't know. I mean, another name that comes up is Elizabeth Brown, Countess of Worcester. Lancelot Carr mentions her in his poem. She has an argument with her brother. He's sort of accusing her of sort of immoral behaviour with sort of men. And she's kind of saying, well, I'm no worse than the Queen. That the Queen offended with Mark Smeaton and her own brother. But we don't know how true that is. And there's no record of Lady Worcester being in court. And Spellman, Justice John Spellman, makes no mention of her. Then you've got John Hussey writes to the Lyells, Lady Lyell, and he writes about the first accuser being the Lady Worcester, and Nan Cobham with one maid more, that the Lady Worcester was the first ground. And we don't know exactly who Nan Cobham was, possibly Anne Bray, Baroness Cobham, who did serve Anne. And as for the one maid more, we haven't got a clue, but Eric Ives speculates that it might have been Marjorie Horseman, who was one of the Queen's ladies. But they certainly weren't called as witnesses at the trial. So Chapuis doesn't name them. But certainly not Jane. Jane's not one of the ones mentioned. I just feel it's so sad. And I think it comes just from her involvement in Catherine Howard's fall, that people then sort of with hindsight think, oh, she must have been wicked, back then.
Yeah, with Jane Boleyn, I think I've never understood how people can make these conclusions, because ultimately it doesn't make sense. I mean, I think, whether we like it or not, this was a deeply patriarchal society, and Jane Boleyn's position at court was really by virtue of her marriage, the status that she achieved, and she was a Boleyn, and that she wouldn't have rallied against that. She wouldn't have tried to destroy that, because to destroy that was to destroy herself in many respects. So for me, it's just never made sense that she was the sort of this evil shrew behind the scenes, sort of pulling the strings. I've never understood that assessment.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense at all.
It just doesn't.
No, I mean, why would she plot against her own husband, bring her own husband down? And, as you say, it's a patriarchal society. She needed him.
And the evidence suggests that she actually didn't. I don't think she tried to visit him, but I don't know if she actually managed to visit him. But
she sent him a message of comfort, and he thanked her for it. So if he thought at all that she was involved in trying to bring him down, I'm sure he wouldn't have thanked her. And she said that she was going to try and do something, try and petition the king.
And people just make these, they sort of see gaps, don't they, and jump to conclusions, like the fact that they didn't have children.
Yeah.
That must mean that the marriage was massively unhappy, or that George was gay. And you just think, well, maybe they just couldn't have children.
Or maybe she had
Yeah.
miscarriages and she wasn't exactly
Yeah.
important. We don't know what happened to the baby that Anne Boleyn was carrying in
Mm,
1534. So why would we know about Jane Boleyn's, obstetric
yeah.
history?
So when it came to sort of making the verdict, did the jury sort of adjourn and sort of decide it over, or was it just sort of done live? How did that aspect of it all work?
From the records, it doesn't say, but it seems to have been pretty quick, whatever happened. The verdict was unanimous and it seems to have been
Mm,
very quickly given. I haven't seen anything. I haven't dug in. I'm not a legal sort of historian. I haven't really dug into how, trials were done. But there's nothing in the accounts saying, oh, the jury, deliberated for 3 hours and then came back. It's all, well, the jury then gave their verdict and they were unanimous. So I kind of just assume it was like, who says guilty? And you put your hand up and they were unanimous.
mm,
So, which was predictable, really.
yes. So the Duke of Norfolk, in his capacity as the sort of the overseer of
Mm,
the trial, read out the verdict and the sentence laid against Anne.
yes.
Can you walk us through this? What was the wording and how was that delivered?
Well, the guilty verdict was given, and Anne was stripped of her titles except Queen. And then Norfolk gave her sentence, and he said, because thou hast offended against our sovereign, the king's grace, in committing treason against his person, and here attainted of the same, the law of the realm is this, that thou hast deserved death, and thy judgment is this, that thou shalt be burnt here within the Tower of London on the green, else to have thy head smitten off, as the king's pleasure shall be further known of the same. So she could have, for a female, she could have been burnt or beheaded. That was up to the king's pleasure as to which one he wanted.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine hearing it's one thing to have a death sentence but to know that there's the possibility that it could be burning. I mean, it must have been terrifying. I mean, I suppose the only saving
Yeah.
grace, well, not saving grace, but I imagine that everyone knew it probably would have been commuted to a beheading, but nonetheless, it must have been a terrifying prospect.
Yeah. I don't know how she managed it, but she's recorded as sort of keeping her composure and
Mm,
then sort of not arguing against the sentence at all, just saying that she believed there was some other reason for which she was condemned than the cause alleged, which pretty much shows
mm.
that,
Yeah, I was going to ask you what was her response?
yeah, that shows that she knows that she's not being got rid of for any of these charges, that it's something else. It's Henry's wish to get rid of her.
Mm,
But I Lancelot de Caux in his poem sort of records her as saying, I do not say that I have been as humble towards the king as he deserved, considering the humanity and kindness he showed me, and the great honor he has always paid me. I know that my fantasies have led me to be jealous, but God knows that I have never done him any other wrong. And
mm.
we don't have her breaking down. We don't have her sinking to her knees, pleading anything. She's dignified and courageous. So amazing.
Yeah, incredibly brave woman. Final question, and I think I know the answer to this, but do you think that Anne ever stood the chance of a fair trial and or possible acquittal?
Well, I can say that in one word, can't I? No, absolutely not. Norris, Western Britain, and Smeaton have already been found guilty. So, she was
Yeah,
no way she was getting off. Her household has been broken up. Jane Seymour,
execution is already on its way as well.
yeah, the executioner was ordered, and is on his way. Jane Seymour has been moved closer to the king so that they can be together. The king sent a message to Jane Seymour on the day of the trial, before the trial has taken place, to tell her that later that day he'll send her news of Anne's condemnation. So,
Yeah.
he knew she wasn't going to get off. But I think she was doomed well before that, well before her arrest. Well, I think she was doomed when after her
Final
miscarriage,
miscarriage.
I think, and because I just think, Catherine's dead. The king doesn't have to go back to Catherine if he gets rid of
Mm.
Anne. He has his jousting accident, which is that brush with death. That reminder of his mortality and the fact that he hasn't got a son. Anne has this miscarriage. History's repeating itself. He thinks his second marriage is just as doomed as his first. I think you've got this perfect storm of just
Mm.
things all coming at once, and him believing he's got to get rid of Anne. And I really believe that he orders Cromwell to get rid of her at any cost. The cost being the men, I think. I think,
Yeah.
because you have people that say, well, how come, Henry Norris, who's a close friend of the king's, his groom of the stall, someone he loves, how? And I that's down to Cromwell, I think, I always say that it's a bit like Wolsey's Eltham ordinances, which purged the Privy Chamber in 1526 and got rid of men that he thought were a bit of a bad influence on the king.
The
I
minions.
think Cromwell thinks, right, well, I can use this to get rid of men that I don't like and that are too influential and are standing in my way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think Anne had absolutely no chance.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing with Cromwell as well, I think it becomes glaringly obvious just how much he is involved in the which of the men are found guilty and which aren't when we look at the fact that Richard Page and Sir Thomas Wyatt are also arrested, but
Yes.
they, unlike the other men,
Yes.
are close with Cromwell, and surprise, surprise, they get released without charge. So I think there is really there's something in that I think people
Yes.
often overlook. That this was also a big, to your point, this is Cromwell clearing out, and I think you see that most with Brereton, because to the best of my knowledge, Brereton barely knew Anne and spent the vast majority of his time in the north of England. So I think it's Brereton that's his inclusion is the one that baffled a lot of people.
Yes, I think it did surprise people. I mean, he was close enough to the king and Anne to go sort of hunting with them. We know that he
Mm,
went hunting with them. And we know he went to her coronation celebrations and things like that. But he wasn't, yeah, as you say, he was more in, Cheshire and North Wales. And yeah, he wasn't like one of the men that was constantly in sort of Anne's chambers. He wasn't a friend of George Boleyn. He wasn't part of this Boleyn circle, really. But yeah, he was standing in Cromwell's way with
Cromwell's way.
Cromwell's reforms in North Wales. Britain actually opposed them. So it's like, oh, I can use him.
Yeah. Again, that just tells us so much, doesn't it?
Yes.
The We mentioned a moment ago about the fact that the executioner from Calais was ordered, was already on his way. Do you have any theories on why this specific method of execution was chosen? Because we know that the overwhelming majority of people were beheaded with a block and axe, and is given this dubious honor or kindness, that the executioner from Calais with the sword was brought in. There's a lot of, some people think it was Anne's request because of her time in France. Do you have any opinion on specifically how this came to be? Because it was not an honor that was given to Catherine Howard a few years later.
Well, yeah, I mean, the idea that it was a French style for, the French kind of sophisticated Anne. And I think that Henry just wanted to be seen to be merciful. That here was
Right.
this queen that had, completely, cuckolded him and made him a laughing stock, but he was going to be merciful to her. Perhaps, her being the mother of his child. And I think it was him trying to look good. That's my feeling on it, and that's not based on anything. There's just nothing. There's no sources really about why he chose that. But I think it was definitely a
Mm,
more merciful death. I mean, if you think about Cromwell's botched execution and the awful Mary Queen of Scots execution,
And Margaret Pole.
yeah, the beheadings could go horribly wrong,
Mm,
and cause real suffering. It wasn't just a few seconds, whereas the sword was. definitely more merciful. Yeah, if you can call any kind of execution merciful. But yes, so I think it's more Henry trying to look good. That's my view.
Well, thank you again so much for coming on to chat with us today. This has been a really interesting discussion, getting to under the skin of the trial of just of this remarkable woman, and a remarkable moment in history, because it was such a first, and it really was just huge. So thank you again for coming on.
Oh, it's been a real pleasure. It's my favourite subject, really, Anne Boleyn.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, and yeah, we'll chat soon.
Yeah, thank you.
And so that brings us to the end of this week's episode of the Tudor Chess Podcast. My thanks again to Claire Ridgway for coming onto the show to discuss Anne Boleyn's trial with us. If you enjoy these episodes, then perhaps you would consider becoming an official patron of the channel, where from just £5 a month you can access all content from the Tudor Chest. To access this, just go to patreon.com/the Tudor Chest. Thank you again for listening, and speak soon.